Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second episode of Piano Star Masterclass, professional piano lessons for everybody, brought to you by Piano League. I'm your host, Brian Lin, professional pianist and a piano teacher. Ever since I graduated from Juilliard a few years ago, making piano education accessible to everybody has been one of my main goals. And that's why I created the series, the Piano Star Masterclass. It starts with a 30-minute interview with a professional pianist, followed by an hour of live-streamed piano lessons taught by that pianist. During the live stream, you can ask us any questions in the chat, and we will do our best to answer them. You can also sign up to be a performing student, regardless of your age or level. Piano Star is all about bringing performance opportunities to piano students. So besides the masterclass, we also have the Piano Star Showcase, an hour-long virtual concert for young pianists ages 7 to 12, with cash prizes. So if your kids or students are within that age range and you want to give them a chance to perform, be sure to check that out on our website. Application deadlines are April 17th. Now, I'd like to introduce our guest teacher today. Said to become one of the truly important artists of his generation, that's how the great American pianist Emanuel Ax describes him. He's an accomplished pianist and composer from Georgia. He first completed his undergraduate studies in Budapest, Vienna, and Florence. Then he moved to New York for his master's degree at the Juilliard School. He is currently pursuing his doctorate at the City University of New York Graduate Center as a recipient of the Graduate Center Fellowship. In 2018, he won the Honens International Piano Competition, one of the most prestigious prizes in classical music. As a result, he was invited to perform at venues like Carnegie Hall, Wigmore Hall, Concerthaus Berlin, Tokyo Bunkakaikan, and 92nd Street Y. He has been featured at many leading music festivals in the United States, Germany, and Canada. He has made orchestral appearances with the London Philharmonic, Milwaukee Symphony, and Calgary Philharmonic Orchestras, among others. And last but not least, he has also recorded for the Hyperion and Steinway labels. So, everybody, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Nicholas Namaradze. All right. Good morning, or I guess I should say good afternoon, Nicholas.
Yeah, where I am, it's afternoon.
Right.
Well,
so
it's great
Nicholas,
to join you, no matter the time of day.
Right. Thank you so much for being with us today. So for those of our audience that don't know, Nicholas is actually in Berlin right now. Is that correct?
Yes, I am in Berlin right now.
That is correct. All right. So our topic today, let's just jump right in. Our topic today is the secrets, the secrets to mental practicing, or why mental practice is musicians' secret superpower. So for our audiences who may not be familiar with the term, how would you define what is mental practice? Can you help us out?
Well, to be honest, mental practice is any kind of practice away from the piano. So, lots of us do score study of pieces we're playing when we're not at the piano, and even that is mental practice. So mental practice is a very, very broad term, and there are many kinds of things that count as mental practice. So I'd say pretty much any kind of practicing you're doing, any kind of thinking you're doing about a piece of music that you're playing without actually playing it, that's mental practice.
Got it. And the next question I have for you is, when or how did you first discover the power of mental practice that made you want to talk about this topic? So what made you do that?
Well, I was always interested in what the brain can do, the connection between physical actions and mental processes. And also I was interested in seeing whether, for example, I can practice something. If I was asked to jump in for a concert and I have to fly somewhere, I don't have that much time to practice. Can I use the time on the plane, on the train, and the car to practice and prepare for a concert without actually having access to a piano? And that is really what got me started, you know, on this topic, got me started thinking about the possibilities. And then I just took it from there.
Gotcha. So when would you say, how old were you when you first discovered, or when you first started thinking, oh, this is an actual thing that I need to be actively doing? Would you say were you younger, or was it a recent thing?
I guess I was always interested in using my brain as much as I could. This is always, I was always a thinker when it came to my artistic approach. I always felt like I wanted to spend time, imagining the pieces of music away from the instrument. That came quite naturally to how I thought I should prepare for a piece of music. And, I grew up in a musical environment where listening to other pieces of music by the composers I'm playing, studying their life was a natural thing that my teachers expected I should do. So this idea that I should be doing kinds of work away from the piano was natural. But this idea of specific mental practice, I really started to appreciate when I started to notice a pattern that when I'd play pieces in concert that I had somehow imagined myself playing, or had done a little bit of work, even not formally, but just randomly, I realized I was playing somehow more confidently, better. I felt like I've been through this before compared to pieces where I hadn't done that. So I started to notice a trend, and that's when I decided, okay, I need to turn this into like a more formal, structured thing that I do regularly.
Gotcha. And just for the record, when did you first start learning piano?
Oh, I was 7 years old.
Oh, you were 7 years
I
old.
was seven
Okay.
years old. Yes.
Gotcha.
So
Gotcha. All right. Um, so naturally, my next question would be, what can you offer our audience today? What types of mental practice that you do that you think are the most effective ways to do it? How does one do it? Share the
sure.
secrets.
Yeah, okay. So I will break this down into basically two parts. I think there are two main situations in which you can use mental practice. The first is when you're actually learning a piece of music. And the second is when you're preparing to perform, like before a concert. So I'll talk about these one at a time. When it comes to the process of preparing or learning a piece, obviously score study is a kind of mental practice. And a lot of us do this. We look at the score, we look at what the composer wrote, we take time to maybe analyze the piece if some of you are into that kind of stuff, understand the structure, whatever. But I think we can add an extra layer to this. I think the best question to ask yourself when you are, starting to form an idea of how you want to play a piece is, if I had no technical boundaries, if I could do anything, like if I were a superhuman kind of being and I could do anything in my imagination, what would be the perfect, most ideal version of this piece, in my opinion? So if I'm learning I don't know, take any piece you're working on, what is like the best version of this that I can imagine in my head? Not like your favorite recording, but your own interpretation. Try to imagine it as vividly as possible. The sound, the articulation, the characters, dynamics, everything. Because the thing is, when we practice, we get used to what we play. We get used to our sound. We get used to whatever it is we're producing. And that means that we think it's okay. We think it's fine. We think it's good because we just keep hearing it. But it's a really powerful step to step back from the piano and think, if I didn't have those limitations, those physical limitations, not only that you can't play it as fast as you want or whatever, but just generally, we all have physical limitations. We're human. But if I were not human, what would be that perfect conception? And really practice trying to hear it, as clearly as possible. We're used to imagining visual things like a mountain, a sea, a lake, but practice hearing sound, tone, color as much as possible. Now, it doesn't mean that you might ever achieve that, but having that idea will mean your practice is much more efficient, much more direction oriented, much more streamlined, and you'll work much faster. You'll have a clearer idea. I feel like if you practice without this kind of, or at least some kind of conception, you're like a person feeling their way in the dark in a cave. You're like walking forward and you're going somewhere, but you don't quite know where you're going. You don't know what your goal is. That doesn't mean that when you get a conception, it stays like that forever and you're never going to change it. No, you might change it every week, every day. But having that mental image is going to make your practice so much more efficient. And, somehow you'll feel like you have a clear idea where you're going. So developing that conception, as I said, happens in two parts. First, studying the score, really discovering how you feel you should interpret this piece, and then having that conception. The next stage, so the second part of this preparation process, is actually practicing it in your head. I'll tell you something that I think is a very powerful piece of information. This is the result of many studies on the brain. And that is, it's quite amazing that actually the brain is not able to distinguish between things you are actually doing and things you are just imagining very vividly. The brain thinks those are the same things. Like, it cannot actually tell the difference. And interestingly, one proof I have of that in my own life is that, I often imagine music in my head, music I might be playing a lot of the time. But if I imagine myself playing a piece, for example, which is quite technically challenging, when I'm not warmed up, for example, if I'm in bed, I just woke up, I am, lying around in bed and I'm imagining things. And if I start seeing that piece in my head and imagine myself playing it, I can feel that my muscles start to get sore, actually, because my muscles have started activating and they are like firing away with those same neural pathways as if I were really playing the piece. But because I'm not warmed up, like, my muscles feel like, they're not ready for it. And I actually feel it in my body. So, when you get used to this, when you practice over and over again, your muscles will start doing whatever it is you think you've told your brain you are actually doing. So the trick here is to convince your brain that you can do things that you actually can't, or you can't yet. For example, there's, let's say, a difficult passage, a hard jump. For example, you're playing La Campanella or Brahms 2, I don't know, whatever. So instead of just practicing it over and over again for hours and hours and hours, what you can do is you can get away from the piano, get yourself in a nice, comfortable armchair, or for me, the most effective is when I'm just walking around my room. Imagine yourself playing that passage in the following ways. Imagine the sound of you like nailing it, like playing it exactly the way you want it to sound. Then imagine yourself sitting at the piano, seeing with your own two eyes your hands making these motions, like what it looks like when you play it correctly. And the third stage, and the hardest part, but maybe the most important, is start imagining what it feels like in your hands. The very interesting thing about piano playing is that if we were deaf, we could still pretty much feel whether we're playing the right notes or not. We can feel whether we're playing the right thing. We can even feel if we're playing it with, what kind of sound we're producing, because the physical response tells us a lot, which is also, it's a double-edged sword, because this means that a lot of the time we pianists stop listening to ourselves because we just can, feel that we're doing the right thing. And that's a very bad habit. So we can use that power we have already, this sensitivity of the kinesthetic response, to try to provoke ourselves to feel what it feels like when we play it correctly. Like when you play that jump and it's completely clean and you don't hit any of the wrong notes next to it, So imagine the sound, imagine what it looks like, and imagine what it feels like to play it correctly. Maybe you'll have to try it out a couple of times at the piano so you actually, first figure out what it feels like, and then you go away. And you keep repeating it in your head over and over again. So you convince your brain that you can do this and it's no problem. Like, you're trying to trick yourself into thinking you can do something that you actually haven't yet practiced. And, you repeat that section over and over again. Then you can go like a couple of bars before, like getting into it, so you feel confident. And then you can like actually run through like the couple of pages before that part, and then get into that difficult section and make it feel like this is no big deal. You're confident, you're calm, and it's no problem. That kind of process will really get you into a different mindset. And you might sit down at the piano and it might not be perfect yet, though a lot of the times it's happened to me that I practice something in my head. I sit down and it's like I've been doing it for hours at the piano. And then what happens is, when you perform, when you play, you have a different strength of your mental conception and you feel like you've done this many times before. you'll feel much more confident in that moment. And, then what I suggest is a lot of the time, one part of practicing is like collecting all the different sections and passages we've practiced into one smooth flow. We practice a page at a time, section at a time, but then, we play it over and over and over again to like pull it all together. This is also a really good stage to use mental practice, to practice moving from one passage to the next, one page to the next, one bar to the next. Maintaining your conception, maintaining the sound you want, maintaining your ideas, and making sure that everything you've really built actually happens when you perform. And this kind of summarizing work is something that can be achieved really well when you are away from the piano. This is kind of a really good use of this practice. Next is preparing for a performance. Now, I'll take an example. If we play in a concert hall many times, or in a room, your teacher's studio or whatever, we get used to it and we feel more comfortable there the more times we play, because we feel like, we know the space, it feels like home. It's not a new, foreign, strange environment. So what I do when I, for example, have a debut in a new place I haven't played in before, is I'll go to Google and I'll look up images of the concert hall. Especially, I suggest looking up images taken from the stage, looking out at the audience, because that's what the concert hall is going to look like when you are standing on stage. I will try to memorize that image as vividly as I can. I will sit down at the piano, or imagine myself sitting down at the piano first. Imagine like that view, that peripheral view of the concert hall in the corner of my eye, and me in that concert hall. And I will play through my pieces, imagine myself playing it there a couple of times, so that when I actually go to that concert hall, it feels like I've done this many times before, and it's not like a new, foreign, unusual thing. I will even sometimes sit down at like my actual piano and imagine visually that hall, like in the back, like on this side of the piano, So that really helps you create the sense of familiarity. And then you do the same thing. You imagine yourself playing the piece, sounding the way you want to. You see the way you're playing, and your visual response is that of the kind of performance you want. And the kinesthetic response is also the same. The sound you want, the notes you want, whatever. And sometimes what I'll do even is I will then pretend like I travel outside of my body and I'm an audience member watching myself doing these things. And it's a good way to get out of your own head and get some perspective on what you're doing. And it can give you like a new view on your interpretation, how you sound. All these things can really help kind of create that sense of solidity. Now, the important thing to know is that it doesn't mean that as soon as something goes a little wrong, like not the way you imagined it, then it's all gone. No, actually, you can take this so far. You can imagine yourself like playing a wrong note or missing something and then getting back on track immediately. You can practice being ready for anything, especially if you're playing with other people, with an orchestra, with chamber musicians, in an ensemble. It's much more unexpected. It's much more unpredictable. You can practice seeing yourself being ready for anything. You can practice different scenarios, but even that, you can just imagine yourself being ready for anything that might happen and being able to adjust. You can even give yourself like some affirmations, like some of us have experience meditating, or you have like daily kind of things that may, some people pray. Everyone has something that they might do, So you can tell yourself like, repeat like, if something goes wrong, I know that's not what's most important. I get back on track. What's important is to, continue expressing what I want, repeat these kind of processes in your head so that if anything happens, you don't feel like, oh, I'm a loser. This is all going bad. I played the wrong note. Now it's, forget about it. This is terrible. No, you should really be ready for anything and have this kind of contingency planned in your head to keep perspective and make sure that you are not going to get fazed by little things going out of the way. So I'm just like brainstorming here. You can use the power of your brain really far. Like what you could even do if you really wanted, like if you feel like you have pre-concert nerves, and like you feel like even like an hour before the concert, you just aren't comfortable, you can even practice seeing yourself backstage in the green room warming up, feeling confident, calm, feeling like this is no big deal. Really imagine yourself and what you're going to be like in that stage. You are preparing your brain and your own neural pathways for something that is going to feel much more natural when the thing actually happens. Use the power of vivid imagination, which we know the brain almost equates to actually doing the thing, to your advantage. It's a very, very powerful, feature of our brains that we have. We can really train our neural systems to kind of prepare ourselves for these scenarios and kind of have a game plan. And this will not only save you time practicing, but will make you feel like you've done this before, you feel much more confident, and that somehow there's a different layer of solidity beyond what can be achieved by just repeating things over and over again in the practice room. There's like a different layer of like you really knowing what's going on. I think that's the real power of mental practice.
Gotcha. Wow, that was a lot of information, and I've heard some things that I could very well use in my own performance as well.
Sure. I mean, we all have different things that we feel like we need to work on. So I've given a lot of different things. And again, people can really be flexible, try to tailor these ideas. I'm trying to give the main concepts, and everyone can use these ideas differently. That's really what's good about this kind of approach, is that we should think about what works best for us, try out different things, think about what we need the most, and use that mental power to really optimize our performance in those areas we feel needs work.
Right. So regarding the point you said about preparing yourself for a performance and really imagining yourself being in the concert hall, I was wondering, because I know a lot of pianists who have a pre-concert ritual. Sorry.
Yeah.
And sometimes they eat a banana, sometimes they wear performance clothes. Do you have one of those? Do you have a ritual of your own, or is that mental practice your thing? Like,
no, well, mental practice is part of it, of course, but I do have certain pre-concert processes that I feel like I want to go through. I tend not to practice too much on the day of a concert. Like, this is not the time to be cramming. You want to do your work beforehand. On the day, I'll do yoga, tai chi, some of those things to physically feel good. Qigong exercises, whatever. Everyone has their own thing, but the things that physically, like I might not lift weights on the day, that you don't want to go to the gym quite, but like some gentle kind of mobilizing exercises. And the big part of the preparation process for me, which is very much tied to mental practice, is meditation as well. I'm a big fan of meditation. I think all performing artists should have at least some experience and some understanding of how to control your breath, bring your heart rate down, get in the zone. That these breathing techniques, these kinds of, ways of focusing my mind are the ways I get in that zone, in that quiet space where you feel like the noise outside kind of goes away and you can really just think about music, you, the instrument, the audience, and that's it.
that actually, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That
actually touches one of my next questions, which is, you mentioned you have to listen or imagine so many things in detail, but a lot of times when you're on a train or on a plane, there are noises around you,
Sure.
right? There are people around you. How do you? Well, I guess you mentioned meditation. Can you go just a little more in depth on how exactly do you meditate so that you can clear out those distractions?
Well, that's an hour-long discussion, So
Right.
And I know we don't.
And we have like 5 minutes, but
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But I think everyone can download Headspace or Calm or some of these meditation apps. Everyone should get a basic idea of what it is to control your breath, And I think perhaps the most important feature of meditation that applies to mental practice and developing that is awareness. Like, one of the first things you learn when you meditate is focusing on your breathing and actually feeling like your belly going in and out with your breath, like the feelings of your clothes that might be shifting a little when you breathe. Like, what do I feel in my body when I am breathing? Like, that's it. And you can use that kind of mental focus on your hands as well. Like, what am I feeling in my fingers? You can develop an extra layer of sensitivity that can really be helpful when you play and perform. So I use a bit of meditation to get myself in that zone. But meditation and mental practice are just like normal practicing. You need to practice. The mind is a muscle. So when you practice physical motions to play a piece of music, in the same way, you need to practice these things. When you meditate, you're not going to get it right the first time. The point is to learn and practice over and over again so that when you are on a plane, with a couple of breaths, you can just snap into a different zone. You won't do it the first day you can meditate. It'll take a while before you get there to make that process between starting meditation and getting in that space much faster. It will take time. Same with mental practice. The first time you sit down, you might have difficulty imagining that sound, imagining, the visual response, imagining the kinesthetic, all these things I've talked about. This takes practice as well, but it's really worth it because it's such a powerful tool to have.
Understood. So I guess my last question before we move on to the masterclass. You mentioned that, of course, we should mental practice when we're away from the piano. But let's say you have access to a piano, do you still do mental practice? And if you do, let's say for our audiences who may not practice, let's say 6-8 hours a day, can you break it down into percentages of time? How much time do you think should spend on mental practice, and how much time do you think you should spend on actual practicing? What's a right balance?
Well, I do practice, mental practice, even if I have a piano, because I can develop different skills when I practice mentally than just at the piano. Also, it means that I can practice more. I don't want to practice more than 5 hours a day or something because I don't, if I don't want to strain my hands too much or whatever, but I can still continue the process in my head, to do different kinds of work. And if I do mental practice, on my interpretation, on my conception, then when I sit down at the piano, I do more streamlined, specific things, working on certain technical elements, rather than trying to find my sound, or my interpretation at the piano. Like I save time at the piano because I've already done a lot of the work in my head. I think it was Theodore Leschetizky, one of the, really great teachers of the past century, well, even further back than that, that said, 1 hour at the piano, 1 hour away. 1 hour at, 1 hour away. So even back then, he said, spend half your time practicing at the piano, half your time practicing away from the piano. I don't think you need to do as much mental practice as you do actual practice. Like if you practice 4 hours a day at the piano, you shouldn't do 4 hours a day of mental practice. That's too much. But and it doesn't have to be so specific. You might need more at the beginning, when you're learning the piece. Then you might be more okay without. And then when you prepare for a performance, bring it back in. So find what works for you. I don't want to be prescriptive, Before a concert, if I'm not practicing that much anymore because I want to keep my, all my muscles fresh and, ready and don't want to be feeling like I'm in the middle of learning a piece of music, I might be doing almost as much mental practice as I do piano practice. Also, if I'm stuck in a hotel and I don't have access to a piano, then I'll be doing more mental practice than I am at a piano. But it really depends on how much you feel you get out of it and how much time you need to get those results. I had to do more earlier on. Now I feel like I can reach those goals much faster because I've done it so much.
Gotcha. So you've done your practice on mental practice.
Absolutely. So you have to practice mental practice to really do it well. Yeah.
Exactly. Wow. Okay. Well, with that, I think we conclude our start talk of the portion of the masterclass, and we go into our next session, which is